believe the world is real. We both see this guy, so we touch him. So we're going to take that as a kind of group given and observe that. From that, we're going to get lots of beliefs. We start putting those beliefs together. Quine's example was a spider web, into a web of belief. Many of those, the first ones we do, have to do with direct observations. They're kind of subjective, they're kind of objective, but direct observations. Some of them later on will be philosophical beliefs that tie the two together. For example, the assumption by everyone who does science and who does philosophy that the universe is regular. Whether there's a God or not, theists assume that God is regular. That's how science was able to be born out of religion. People like William of Ockham had good reason to think that you shouldn't multiply entities needlessly, because God would be regular, he would design with strategy. Those beliefs, hang on, so some are very externally constrained, the things we choose to accept as externally verified. Then there are second kinds of sub-beliefs that are themselves philosophical to help all the beliefs cohere. Now, what we would want to do is do this. Do our observations make sense of the world as we seem to be observing it? That's where science can help us. Second, do the philosophical beliefs that we picked up cohere and make all those beliefs work together without cheating, without being irrational, without, just saying something because I want to believe it? That web of belief is sadly never going to be certainly true, because however we develop it, to give you the big thing, this is where Schirmer conceded that this is the case, and where theism can't be called irrational and just fideism. To pick between idealism as a general belief and materialism as a general belief, or dualism as a general belief, will never have anything to do with science. It will have to do with philosophical preferences based on, for example, I could do the same science
Which is why I strike it as being irrelevant when we bring it up.
No, it isn't irrelevant in this way. Daniel Dennett, to hold to materialism, it's not an attack on Dennett. Dennett himself says this, has to assume in the end that mind doesn't exist. That he, Daniel Dennett, doesn't exist. It's what he calls the Cartesian theater, where, our brains trick us into believing we exist. There are just a series of brain states. Now, that's a high cost. The advantage to dualism/theism would be I can do science. In fact, I do the exact same science as Dennett, but I don't have to assume, because I'm not a materialist. Let's say I'm an idealist. I'm in fact not, but the simplest way to go is idealism. I can assume that Daniel Dennett exists. Now, I don't care how much science we talk about. Science is never going to be able to choose between those two worlds. And here's the work one does. In one world, Daniel Dennett doesn't exist. He's a series of brain states. In another world, those same series of brain states exist, but Daniel Dennett exists. Now, that's a philosophic preference, and philosophers could bet back and forth, but science isn't going to determine it. Now I'm done. Now you can attack the view, but that's the view. The view isn't that we should just leap out there and believe anything, or that everything's subjective.
Okay. So what I often do when I'm getting into debates with theists is I try to get them to agree that reality is real by definition, because I hate that every time I try to bring up evidence, it immediately turns into how do we know anything, where suddenly we can't know that we even exist. So in a recent debate, or a debate I had about a year ago, I told the guy at the beginning, I said, your position is so weak that the only way that you can be right is if reality is wrong. And very quickly, usually at the beginning of the debate, you will tell me that in some way that reality is wrong or might be wrong. And it was minutes later, when I start presenting evidence that he can't refute, the only way he can deal with that evidence is by telling me that I can't even prove that I in fact existed 2 weeks ago, because I might be a brain in a vat and all my memories might be false. And I said, thank you for telling me that reality might not be real, exactly as I predicted you would do.
Okay.
Now, if I may throw out something else. Now, if I'm listening to your presentation and I think that something that you just said contradicts something that you previously said. And that's the only thing that I remember about it. What was the thing that he said that contradicted the other thing? So I say, well, of course, you wouldn't have seen it that way. You wouldn't have seen it as a contradiction of the other thing that you said. That's a fair statement and not remotely an insult, which you understand.
Go ahead. What is it?
I don't remember the example, but yeah, it had something to do with we can't give the details of a thing if we can't verify that the thing exists. Well, that's what Christianity is. It's giving details about something.
I think that you don't understand that if you're talking to a philosopher, whether they're a theist or not, the problem with your arguments is that your terms are so loose. You're using terms in such a loose, imprecise way that it isn't that I want to deny reality. It is that by the time I nail down what you're saying, I'm not denying reality anymore. You've just used language in a very sort of vague way.
I do exactly the opposite. I use very precise definitions.
Excellent.
Okay, so an example I was talking about with somebody else, I was looking around, he's not here anymore, but he says that something about being just animals, because it's the evolutionary view that we're just animals. And I said, well, you realize that whether God exists or not, either way, you're still an animal. I don't believe I'm an animal, he says. Okay. You're an animal is any multicellular eukaryote
from
with an internal
Aristotle
digestive
forward,
tract,
almost
right?
all Christians at almost all places at almost all times have believed that humans are animals in an interesting and important sense of the term. So I agree with you.
So but it's not a point of whether you agree with me.
Right.
The point is the person I'm talking to admits that he's a multicellular eukaryote with an internal digestive tract, but says he doesn't believe he's an animal. Except this is a fact, right? And it's objectively verifiable. But he's denying it because he doesn't want to believe it.
In fact, what you've described isn't a fact, even on your view of facts.
It's
a definition. No,
point of data.
what you've done is define the English term animal as it's used in science using a set of criteria. If we accept that set of criteria, then you're right, he should have agreed that he was an animal. But notice, you're dealing with the definition of a word, you're not dealing with facts. So, for example, last night...
How am I not dealing with facts? Is it a fact that we are all multicellular?
Good.
Is it a fact that we've matched the definition?
Yes.
Okay.
No, listen to what you're saying. Because, in fact, this is a good point.
Are you sure it's a fact?
It is a fact that we're multicellular. It is a choice within the English language to use the term animal to describe something that has the following factual characteristics. So it is an accident of language that we use the term animal or even glump certain characteristics together to use the phrase animal. Not everybody divides taxonomy up the same way, recall. So the definition, once we accept your definition of animal, and we should, that's the way people use the term animal in science and not being clever, agreeing with a definition, however, is different than agreeing with a fact. If I disagreed we were multicellular, I'd be disagreeing with a fact, as you're using fact.
Denying animals is the same as denying eukaryote. Because a eukaryote only implies that all your cells have a nucleus, including your blood cells at one stage.
I must be being very unclear. All right, so let me try it this way. Let's invent the invented word gavagai. And we're going to say the word gavagai means attached rabbit parts.
I got a better example for you. Right? I was born in mid-October. There are people that call me Libra. I meet the definition of Libra. Can I decide that I'm not a Libra because I don't want to be?
Right.
I don't, this is why I said rules apply to me that do not apply to theists.
No.
Because I can't just say that if the definition defines me, or if it describes me, that it defines me, right?
But notice that
regardless whether I believe in astrology or not.
Notice contradicting a definition is different than contradicting a fact. That's all. I'm making one simple point. You asked me, you said, I want to be very clear and precise in my language. So I'm trying to be very clear and precise in my language. What the person disagreed with, they shouldn't have disagreed, was not with facts, but with your definition.
Okay, so how do I verify that I'm using the correct definition?
If you had started, and you did, I think that they were wrong to do what they did, by saying, I'm going to define animal with this set of facts. Do you agree that you have all those factual characteristics? And they said yes. and they had already accepted your, or the community's, agreed to prior definition, then they should have logically accepted that they were an animal.
Thank you.
But
Because he did.
but notice,
Is it Chinese, English is a second language.
it's his second language,
Anyway,
right?
But just,
But notice that if we got into a discussion of what was an animal, we're going to actually end up discussing which bundle of facts to put in the definition of animal. And so the disagreement might not be about facts, but classification systems, which scientists do all the time, right? So I have good friends who are biologists. I'm not one. I don't, do biology for a living. And they go back and forth on what kinds of classification systems would be best for understanding the natural world, how to subdivide the natural world. Is it useful to talk about animals as opposed to non-animals? And so they argue about that. Notice when they argue about that, they're arguing about definitions, which is an important thing to argue about. That's what we're talking about now,
I'm the
not about
director-
facts.
I'm the director of the Phylogeny Explorer project. and
Excellent.
It's a taxonomic website, essentially.
Right,
The entire tree of life rendered
right.
as a navigable online encyclopedia.
I've been there.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, I knew that from reading your bio on phylogeny. I should have said it that way. So great, that's a good thing. But notice when you do that, you're dealing with definition sets. And if somebody came to you and said, wow, I prefer, a different, I prefer to look at the tree of life differently. I'm not even talking about disputing Darwinism or things. We'd like to run the cladograms differently. We'd like to say this is related to that. We'd like to redefine things. You wouldn't be having an argument about facts. You'd be having an important argument about how to define those facts. And why is that important? Because those definitions give us a tree of life, or they give us relationships that might help us see other relationships. Now, what does that have to do with what we're discussing? My suggestion to you is this. A lot of discussions, at least from what I'm hearing, you're using words in ways that philosophers would not use them. So it's creating confusion in your listeners, because they'll say, no, I don't think that's a fact.
So how do you define a fact then?
I would say,
Because again, I'm being as precise as I possibly can. I go to every definitive source I can. I see where they hold consensus, and I summarize what they're all saying.
let me ask you a question. When it comes to deciding definitions of terms like fact, argument, logic, terms, what career field deals with those?
I don't know the name.
It's philosophy of language. So what we would do, and what you should do, because I do this on the fly, because I give you a bad one, and then my grad professors would yell at me. Go to a decent philosophy of language book, get a term for term, find out what terms mean, find out what facts mean to those people. It's not going to stop you from doing science. It is going to produce a kind of linguistic clarity that will help you win an argument where you've actually won an argument with what the person believes, instead of winning an argument by winning it through confusion.
Do you use a different definition of fact than I do?
Yeah, I do.
What is your definition of fact?
It is a mind-independent reality that may or may not be knowable by me.
Okay, I don't see that as being significantly different than what I'm talking about.
It will turn out to be.
Okay, there's a chevron shape on the moon Miranda, one of the moons of Neptune, I believe it is. And it wasn't observed until 20 years ago.
Right.
But clearly, this thing existed out in space, a result of some undescribed event, before we knew about it.
Yeah, as far as we know.
So we'll both call that a fact.
Sure.
Yeah, that's
in the
a
sense
point
I'm
of data.
using.
That's a point of data that we can also
No,
objectively verify.
I'm not. I'd have to talk about data and exactly what you think data is.
Okay, now if we want to propose...
Can I just point out that you've gone from using the word fact to the word data, And the word fact and data aren't the same thing.
Okay.
Not all data would turn out to be facts. For
Right.
example,
So-
the number 1.
Okay. So if we want to propose that a moon we have yet to see has this shape on it, and we don't yet know that, is that a fact?
That would be a proposal about, it's a hypothesis about what we would find.
Can you say that it's a fact?
No.
Then we agree.
Good. So clarity is awesome. And there's nothing about theism that harms that in any way. In fact, the reason people originally believed that in the Western parts of the world was because of theism.
I would argue otherwise because it is dishonest to assert as fact that which is not evidently true, and you agreed with that a moment ago.
What you
Yet that's
just
what all
said
religions do.
is it's dishonest to argue as fact
Assert as fact.
that which is not evidently true. What do you mean by evidently true?
You're going to say, it's okay to say that you believe X, but you can't state that X is true.
Do you have a mind?
Yes.
Good. Do scientists like Richard Dennett agree that you have a mind?
Okay.
Daniel Dennett, I'm sorry. No, they don't in fact agree on it. So it isn't self-evident that you have a mind. We're taking it as a working hypothesis. So lots of things we take as working hypotheses, maybe even the existence of God, aren't facts in the brute given of the chevron shape on a moon. Those are actually really simple things to deal with.
So when we have a handful...
Complex phenomena like minds are harder to deal with because there could be many ways of explaining them.
Okay. So when a handful of theists arguing with each other, giving specific details about God and all of them contradict each other, they all being honest? Because they're all asserting absolute truth.
It could be that all of them are wrong, that some of them are wrong,
Can
or
anyone...
that one of them is right. All of those are logically possible. We'd have to listen to them.
If any of them said that there was a chevron on a moon that we haven't seen yet, and it hasn't been seen, so how would we know? Is that person being honest?
I wouldn't say they were being dishonest as much as being foolish.
Okay, well, I think we can compromise on that. Because if you have a handful of people all asserting as
I
fact
see. We're
conflicting
doing
beliefs...
fun, weird Socratic dialogue that has a kind of outcome. I teach Socratic dialogue. You want to be careful about using Socratic dialogue when you have the end in mind, because it's ersatz
don't.
Socratic dialogue. Okay, go ahead then.
I was trying to illustrate something.
Go ahead.
Okay. The effect of, it's whether you call it dishonest, I would say it's dishonest to say that you know something that
Okay.
you don't know.
Well, let's
I
call
can't.
it dishonest.
Okay, because I mean you're saying you know something you don't know.
I don't think there's moral intent, and I think dishonesty. See, this is again, we're back to terms. You shift from one term to the other. I think dishonesty requires moral intent. I think a lot of times people say dumb things that they shouldn't say, but they have no intent to deceive.
Okay, and my definition of a lie does include that they must have the intent to deceive.
Good. Then
But
they're not lying.
intellectually, the term intellectually dishonest still applies here.
No, you could only be intellectually dishonest. So, for example, my grandmother, who was taught in school, in her public school, that breast milk was bad for babies and that you should use government-certified milk, and went around telling people that even after she should have known better, but she only went through 8th grade, so she didn't. She wasn't being intellectually dishonest. She was just wrong. But she was saying that in good faith.
So it's not dishonest to pretend to know things you don't know.
It would be dishonest to pretend to know things you don't know, but not to be mistaken that you know things that you don't know. For example, in my opinion, you are wrong that God doesn't exist. And your logic is flawed on things like the ontological argument. But I would never say that you are intellectually dishonest, because I assume in intellectual good faith you've just come to a different conclusion than I have. Being wrong isn't a moral sin, even from an atheist point of view.
Okay,
Right?
so Seitan Bruggencate somehow meets Sir Isaac Newton. Both make the same argument at each other, and I've seen this. Sir Isaac Newton wrote that he was chosen by God to have a higher understanding of the Scripture than any other man. And being the most brilliant man possibly in history, that's a fair thing for him to say. He probably has a better understanding of those things than any other man.
Well, except here's the problem. If I keep picking on what you're saying, it just sounds like I'm delaying you. But that's crazy, right? It's really silly to think that because someone has a high IQ, they're more likely to hear from God than someone with a low IQ.
Agreed. I'm not making that point.
So Newton, in fact, it isn't sensible. What you said was, well, if anybody had a right to say that, it would be, no, lots of people have the right to say that. You don't have to have a high IQ to hear me. Right?
Given the context of the rest of the sentence, it would have made sense.
Okay.
Because his opponent is Seitan Bruggencate, a man who isn't trained in anything, who also makes the same claim. And both claim that they have this direct revelation from God, which is not God talking to them, but rather God talking to them through the Scriptures. So they're both reading the Scriptures, and basically what they're both doing is they're both interpreting the Scriptures, what they think it means, and then both claiming that God is telling them this through the Scriptures, and that they both have a higher understanding of the Scriptures than any other man. Now, if both of these men agreed, I wouldn't have much that I could say about that, except that they disagree on a key point. And so I hit Seitan Bruggencate with this. Sir Isaac Newton says that Jesus was not a divine being, that he was not the product of God. You say he is. You both are inspired by God, told by God, the absolute truth. You can't know anything unless you know everything. The only way you can know anything is if you know someone who knows everything. But since you don't know everything, you don't know if you know somebody who knows everything.
Okay, none of that is true. So you've just gone through a long you've just gone through a long rant, none of which I concede. So now you've set up a false dilemma.
Question. I didn't. I asked you, is either of them being dishonest?
I can't know the answer to that without using a science called hermeneutics, which I use as a secularly trained philosopher to understand something like Plato. The fact that we all read the text of Plato and are sometimes unsure of what Plato means doesn't mean Plato didn't exist, or that Plato didn't write a book, or that Plato isn't talking to us. It just means we need to have long philosophic dialogue using the science called hermeneutics, which I went through way too many grad seminars trying to decide what was right. So either both of them are wrong, one of them is right, or both of them are right because there's some meta theory that makes what they've said not contradict but cohere. I probably don't think the third one is true. And so I would want to look at the first two possibilities and have a long discussion. Why cut off discussion?
So either one, because you said that Sir Isaac Newton, even compared to Seitan Bruggencate, Sir Isaac Newton is still not justified in making that statement.
I didn't say he wasn't justified. I said his IQ had nothing to do with the justification.
It's the only thing he's got going on.
No, that's
giving
not
him any
true.
more credence
He
than
could be
anyone.
particularly pious. He could particularly good reader of text. Forget God and the Bible for me, making this overly complicated. If we're both reading Plato's Republic, and you say Cephalus, whose name means big head, leaves so the discussion can continue, and I say, no, I don't think that's quite right. I think he leaves because he represents religious piety, and religion has to leave for the discussion to continue. We both can't be right, and so we have a long discussion looking at the text, examining the manuscript, and we finally come to the conclusion that you're right and I'm wrong, or we just agree to disagree. We're not sure, because textual interpretation is not an exact science.
So what I'm getting is that you should not state as fact what is not evidently true. Like my wife was raised in a family divided between Catholics and Protestants, both telling her that the other parent was going to hell because they're in the wrong religion. So both factions of that
What do you
family.
mean by evidently true? You've never defined it. Certainly true?
Evidently was the way I defined
Yeah,
it for you.
I would never, ever, even as a philosopher in Plato studies, say it's a fact that my interpretation of the text is true. It would simply be true that my interpretation of the text is true. That's not a fact
As
type
you
thing.
correctly observed, I primarily deal with fundamentalists because my argument primarily is against creationism, and more specifically...
I'm a young earth creationist, so I'm okay to talk to you about that. But I'm not a fundamentalist either, so I think I'm a little different than what you usually deal with, but that's okay. You can pretend I am. What I'm saying is your whole dilemma fails for this reason. I don't have to pick between the two of them. nor do I have to doubt that the Bible's the Word of God, nor do I have to do anything else. I just suspend judgment. Now the fact,
Which is what I was arguing for.
here's good news. They don't have to suspend judgment, because the way research works is I read a book, I work really hard on it, I think I know what it says, I write a learned paper about it, and I assert this is what Plato means.
Okay.
And then someone contradicts me, and we don't kill each other. We have a giant seminar where we talk about our two views, and we may persist in disagreeing. But I'm not being a liar to leave the seminar and say, I think Plato says this.
I'm not just saying that lies are the only form of dishonesty. That you can be dishonest with yourself and not realize that you're lying.
Sure.
Okay.
But neither people in your case need to be doing that. They might be. I'd have to look at it.
Okay. You also said I didn't define evidence, but I did. I said that evidence is a body of objectively verifiable facts which are positively indicative of or exclusively.
Yes, I know you have that
with.
memorized, but we already moved
But
through
you
the
said
fact
we
that
didn't-
objective
you said I didn't
facts don't
define it.
exist.
I did define it.
Yes,
And
your definition is no
So when I
good.
say now that something that we shouldn't assert as fact that which is not evidently true, then I'm obviously talking about things that we can't show the facts to indicate that.
Yeah, lots of things are true for which there are no facts. 2 + 2 is 4 is
Which-
known to be true
which is demonstrable.
without any facts as you've defined.
I'm sorry, you said it wasn't even empirical, which it is.
2 + 2 = 4 is an empirical truth.
It also works with logic.
No, I'm sorry. You need to go get a book on philosophy of mathematics.
I just got a dictionary. It said
No. Mathematics, the number 1 does not exist in the physical world. So any truth of mathematics cannot be a truth of the empirical world by definition.
But you can demonstrate.
No, that math happens to work more or less is an amazing thing, and philosophers still wrestle with why that's true. Theists have a reason for it. Everyone else takes it as a brute given. But it's not an empirically known thing. You couldn't possibly know that math was going to work through empiricism.
Demonstrable. Repeated.
No, it just works.
Which means it's repeated. It's demonstrably repeatable.
You seem to
Repeatedly
think that
demonstrable.
something has to be repeatable to be true.
Not necessarily.
Right. So good. Let's eliminate that. And
We
facts.
agreed that the Chevron
Not
existed
everything,
before anybody
right?
knew about it.
That's right, and that does fit your definition of fact. But not everything does.
Okay, so
And
clearly,
facts are not objective.
so clearly, when I say that people should not assert as fact what is not evidently true, what I am saying is that people shouldn't make a statement that they know something that they can't give any indication that that is even true.
This is wrong.
In other words, we can't distinguish this from the illusions of delusion.
No,
or imagination.
scholarship would be impossible if that were true. In scholarship all the time, I do the best I can. I look at the world, I look at the text, I look at my experience, I make the best judgment I can. I assert that as far as I can tell, something is true. It turns out not to be true. I'm not being a liar. I'm advancing the cause of scholarship. Being wrong is okay. Hooray for being wrong.
If you say that you know things you don't know, I would still call that dishonest.
Only if you should know better. In other words, if I'm
Shouldn't
working...
you know better than to know things you don't, than to say you know things you don't know?
That has nothing to do with what I just said, but it's kind of clever. It would make a good Twitter handle. I may steal it from you. Here's what I'm saying. If I study a manuscript or I study the natural world and I make an extrapolation from the manuscript or an extrapolation from the natural world, I might be wrong. I might even be seriously wrong. But if I present my views, I have to say something like this. This is what I think is true. I may even say, I know it's true. I've thought about it a long time. No in the loose sense, not that I'm certain, but this is the best I can do. You disagree with me, we have an argument. I haven't been naughty or intellectually disingenuous. I haven't broken the laws of reason. In fact, that's how reason moves forward. Throwing out an idea that you've investigated the best you can and discovering you're wrong. Let me give you an example. Aristotle talks about the nature of substance in Metaphysics, Book Zeta. I spent 14 weeks trying to understand what Aristotle meant by ousia in Metaphysics, Book Zeta. I decided it meant stuff, matter, crude matter. I presented that in a paper in a grad program, doing the best I can. Man, it turned out that I became persuaded by someone else in my grad program that that was entirely wrong. They didn't say, wow, Reynolds, you should have known better than that. You're being a liar, you're being disingenuous. That's the way scholarship works. In another case, I had a view about how Plato worked. My good friend Hud had a different view about Plato works. Hud's now teaching philosophy, I think, at Washington. And I'm, starting a new school. We still disagree, but I don't think Hud's a liar. I just
so
think
again,
we
agree, and I'm not in the position you're trying to box me into. I mean, myself, I come to the passage in the Bible that you'll probably be able to tell me where it is better than I can. The bit about the four-legged locusts that have legs above their feet, right? I interpret that as, since we know that grasshoppers, typically called locusts, don't have four legs, that maybe they're talking about bats, because the Bible tends to classify things by what they do rather than what they are, which is why whales are fish and bats are birds. Bats could also be locusts because they go about on all fours as described, and that they also swarm. So this is an interpretation that could be supported by what I'm saying.
Sure.
I'm not saying that I know that.
Sure.
I'm suggesting that this might be.
Well, if I know you mean you're certain, you could study it long enough and look at all the arguments where I think it's a useful sense of the word no to say, yeah, I think this is right. And I'm going to base my book on it. I'm going to write this. And I'm going to say you should believe it, because I think it's true.
I would still put that as an hypothesis if I can't verify
Great.
that is.
Good. We'll use that term then, hypothesis. And so imagine that's what Sir Isaac Newton and his friend were doing. They were both strongly advancing hypotheses about what the text said. Which one was right? I don't know. I'd have to look at both interpretations.
Sir Isaac Newton and his friend. You don't know who Seitan Blumentritt is.
No, I don't know that background
Now
story.
I can truly tell you that you are blessed.
Good. So here's the point. There's no dilemma there. In other words, it's just normal scholarship. We'd sit down and look at their interpretation of text,
Right.
and they both could be wrong,
Right.
or one of them could be right.
I have the feeling that since we began talking, that you've been arguing against something I wasn't saying.
Well, what are you saying?
I don't even remember. It's been so long.
So far, I think what you've said
But I've been
that
trying to
theists-
find where what you're saying is relevant to where I was going. And although I lost where I was going, I never found where it was relevant.
Well, you
to what I was
started by
talking
saying
about.
that theists are not good because theists, and you've got
That
a
is
little.
actually not remotely what I said. I
well,
said there are
theism-
rules that apply to me that don't apply to, and we just call them believers. The rules apply to me that don't apply to believers.
As far as I can tell, that's not true.
Okay, I have to, you said reserve judgment when you can't be sure.
Right.
That's the rule that applies to me. But you can't be sure there's a God, but you're still going to say that there is. So you're going to maintain a belief even though you can't be sure of it. You said last night that we can never know whether there's a God. But there's people all over the place who say that they know that there's a God, that they talk to him, that they have a personal relationship.
Yeah, you're simply equivocating about the word no. I think I know that
I don't
you
think
have...
I'm equivocating.
No,
I think
wait,
I'm
hang
stating
on.
a fact.
Hang on. I think there are two useful senses of the word no. There's knowing something with what philosophers call Cartesian certainty. I know that 2 + 2 = 4. Once I understand that concept, I at least, and most people, find it impossible to doubt it. It's indubitable. Most truths turn out not to be like that at all, especially interesting ones. I say I know my wife Hope loves me, but I know plenty of people who have turned out to be deceived, even though they had very little data. Like, it was reasonable for them to believe their spouse loved them. They acted on it, they built their whole lives on it, and it turned out they were just wrong. But we didn't run over them to say, wow, you're intellectually dishonest, you should have had a better
That's never
epistemology.
what I said.
No, let me finish. When I say I know there's a God, I'm saying that's the best hypothesis I have. I think there's good reason to believe it. I think there's good philosophic reason. I think I have good experiential reason. And I think I have good communitarian and cultural reasons to believe it. Could I be wrong? First, I could be wrong to be a Christian. Someone else could be right in their interpretation of the divine. Sure, absolutely. Have those discussions all the time. Could I be wrong that God exists? Absolutely. So I don't have, and as far as I know, no Christian believes Cartesian certainty that God exists, unless, and one caveat, the ontological argument works. If the ontological argument works, then I can say that I'm certain there is a greatest possible being. We'll call him God. But that doesn't get me to the God of the Bible anyway. There'd be a big logical gap. So since I think the ontological argument probably works, that it's valid in its current form, and it persuades me, I can say I'm certain that the greatest possible being exists. We'll call it God. But that doesn't give me certainty about Christianity. I'm not at all certain that Christianity is true.
I think what I said that you objected to, and I can't, like I said, I can't remember because it was so long ago, but I remember one of the things that I said that you contested was that the purpose of religion was to make people believe, and you said that wasn't true. I
Right.
can't think of a religion that doesn't require that. I mean, that's why they're called belief systems. They have required beliefs and they have prohibited beliefs, which by contrast is why free thinkers don't have required beliefs or prohibited beliefs.
Either I agree with you because I think every single human being has a belief system, whether they're materialists, naturalists, atheists, or theists.
I would say no, because I don't have required beliefs and I don't have prohibited beliefs. I'm free to believe whatever I
Are you
want.
required to do science to believe that the universe is real?
No, I don't have required beliefs. I don't have to believe anything.
Are you required to believe math works?
I'm inclined to hold only to what is
As
true.
far as that goes, then that's what I believe as a theist. I agree with you. If that's how you want to define knowing and believing, nothing you said is incompatible with
So
Christianity.
the prize in Christianity is not to believe. You don't get forgiveness if you but believe.
Wait, I thought we had now defined belief in a broader way.
I think you and I use a different definition for belief.
Okay, here's what
When I say I believe something, it means that I suspect that this is true, or partial, or at least probably true, or at least closer to the truth.
Great, that's what
But
I
I
mean.
don't know.
That's what I mean by
But
belief.
believers seem to express that as a verb, as an act of will,
Oh,
of
they
mind over
shouldn't.
matter.
If they do, they shouldn't.
I hear all the time that if they could only believe hard enough,
Okay,
which
but
to
notice
me,
we're
when
agreeing.
you say the sentence, if I could only believe hard enough, that sounds like pretend.
Yeah, okay. That person shouldn't say that. So when you meet them, they won't care what I say, but they shouldn't say that. That's sub-Christian. What you just said is what I believe about Christianity, which I believe it's an explanation. It's the best explanation given best reason and best experience.
Okay,
Am
so
I sure
believing-
it's true in a Cartesian sense?
So believing that Jesus is your Savior is not the means of salvation?
My belief that Jesus is the Son of God and He is my Savior is my best explanation.
Your salvation
For
is not
the-
tied to that.
Well, if I'm right, then it is, but I could be wrong.
So if you're right, then it is tied to that.
No, if I'm right, yes, it is tied to it, but notice I don't have to have certainty about my belief to hold it, because we've
didn't
already,
require that.
right, we've all agreed on that.
Okay.
So in that sense, religious belief, in that sense, is no different than any other kind of philosophic belief.
Regardless whether we're talking about Christianity or whether we're talking about Islam, I mean, because the Quran says the
atheism.
same thing. No, the atheism is different.
No.
Yes, I haven't gotten to finish the point yet. Regardless whether we're talking about the Bible or whether we're talking about the Quran or we're talking about the Bhagavad Gita, they all praise religious faith and they praise belief, if you but believe. That all these rewards will come if you believe. Atheism, as an exception, does not offer anything if you believe. You don't have to believe.
No.
There's not a belief system. There's no faith required. It is very often, but not always, it is very often the rejection of faith.
Do you act on beliefs?
Yes,
Do you get rewards by acting on beliefs?
only when I'm correct.
Right.
Because I say that only
what I
accurate
would say
information
to
has
you,
practical
the
application.
religion that I believe in, let's forget about everybody else's religion,
Okay.
gives me rewards if I act on it, if I'm correct. So we're just the same.
I don't think so, but I think we're going to be arguing circles
No,
indefinitely.
that's not. No, we're not arguing in circles at all. I'm accepting totally your definition. I'm agreeing with that we should all live like you say atheists believe that we should live, and that we should act based on best reason and best experience, and that's what I'm calling belief. And if I'm right about Christianity, then I'll get treats. Just like if you're right that there's steak over there in the corner and you act on it, you'll get the treat of the steak. So there's nothing weird about this. Telling someone, hey, you should believe this because you'll get something good out of it. Could be true if I were an atheist. It could be true if I'm a theist. Now, that doesn't prove theism is true, but it does prove I'm not thinking differently than you are, or in some kind of weird religious way. We're not arguing in circles at all. Win. Let me agree with you. I agree with you.
Okay,
Hooray.
we'll just let that be. I think.
But wait, how are we disagreeing?
Because every time I try to start making a statement, you change every part of that statement until I eventually forget what the statement
Okay,
was.
we're not doing that anymore, notice. You have said we should believe things, good atheism. We don't get rewards just for believing them. We get rewards for believing things or not believing them by following the truth. The best
By
evidence and
following the truth,
experience.
which means we withhold our. A belief is a conviction. So a lack of belief is a lack of conviction, right? So atheism is simply being unconvinced that a magical anthropomorphic immortal really exists.
Okay, so we got a weird description of God, which seems to have come off the Twitter feed. But leaving the insult and the bad
not an
language
insult.
aside, no, it's just false. I don't believe in that God. I don't believe in any magical being.
So, really,
No,
you realize miracle and magic have the same definition.
no, they don't.
They're both the evocation of
Okay,
supernatural forces.
go read
ready to
Richard
be-
Swinburne's book on miracles. He defines miracles. He doesn't define it as magic.
Very few
I know.
people realize that, the miracle and magic have the same definition.
Well, very
The
few,
evocation
very,
of supernatural forces.
very few people realize it because, as Christians understand it, that's not true.
I know that Christians don't realize it. Yeah, I get that. But that they are the same. They are effectively
Okay,
the same
so here's good
definition.
news. However I may have been confusing or naughty or done the wrong thing, we're both agreeing on exactly this. You don't have to be certain to act on a belief. You just have to follow best reason and best experience, do the best you can, and modify your beliefs based on the evidence and based on your experience as you go. And what I'm telling you is, that's what Christians believe you should do, and I think that's what you just said you believe you should do.
I want to make a clarification because I'm an epistivist, is how I identify.
You're what?
Epistivist. Which means that I hold faith as being the most dishonest position it is possible to have. That it is not possible to have a less honest position than faith. Because you're asserting as fact things which are not evidently true, and very often refusing to change your mind in the face
Your
of
name
the
is
evidence.
Aaron?
Aaron.
Aaron, can I point out that you're merely repeating exactly the same phraseology, which we showed earlier is inadequate to modern philosophical understanding of data and fact, and you really need to let go of false beliefs you have when they no longer are adequate to explain philosophy.
Right, I'm wholly down with getting rid of any false beliefs.
Right.
However, since I do deal with many young earth creationists who contradict you on a daily basis, they're all describing faith as belief as an act of will, where you will believe it, you will eat the word, as one person described it. You read the most ridiculous thing out of the Bible and embrace each other and say, isn't it wonderful that this thing is true? Making themselves believe, right? Make believe. It's pretending. It's forcing a conviction.
So I met an atheist once that couldn't be a Christian because they believed that when Jesus said he was the door, he was made out of wood. But we don't want to win an argument with the stupidest person we can find.
That's not obviously
we want
what I'm doing.
to win an argument with the person we're actually talking with.
Right, so-
and try to see the truth. And here's what
Right,
I'm
so-
saying.
so what
Let
I'm
me
saying
agree
is-
with you.
Okay. Let me finish the points that you can understand what you're going to agree with.
All right.
Okay, so in my perspective, we base our beliefs on evident probabilities, past experience, and so forth.
Great.
And we can be uncertain about those things.
Great.
But that does not qualify as faith.
Great.
Okay, or we can base our beliefs on faith, which means we're going to believe this anyway. We've already decided we're going to believe
No, I
this.
don't
We didn't
agree
need to
that's
have-
what faith means.
We didn't have to have evidence to convince us. 'Cause
No, I don't
yet-
believe in that kind of faith. Great. So faith.
so what was
if we're going
the
to use
evidence
faith
that
that way,
convinced-
if we're going to use faith that way, I don't believe in it. So
Okay.
this thing over
This
here.
is my problem is with the theists I deal with. They make this definition of faith.
Great.
And very
They're
often
wrong.
okay.
So Now let's deal with serious theism of the sort that's been around since Justin Martyr, who's second century apologist,
And
all the
he-
way
he's
through
guilty of the same thing.
Tom. No. This is what I do for a living. So let me tell you, here's faith.
Wasn't he the one?
You work from best reason to best experience. You commit yourself, is an old Napoleonic phrase, and then you see, and if it doesn't work, you start contradicting data, or it doesn't cohere, or you start saying illogical things, you change your mind. That's what you should do. That's living by faith. Why is it living by faith? Because it's not certain.
So
In
Ken
other
Ham-
words, it's not
Ken
seen
Ham
clearly.
saying-
Ken Ham's no fan of mine. Google me under the.
But you understand he's using the definition I give, right? 'Cause
Well,
he
he does-
says no evidence ever, and his website says, and every creationist website that I'm aware of posts a statement of faith wherein they word it differently in different places, but they all admit that they will not, they will never consider any evidence that they're
Here's good news for you. Ken Ham does not consider me a Christian. So,
Okay.
hooray. I actually consider Ken Ham a Christian because I agree with you on your definition of what I'm calling faith. So, to talk to me in good faith, don't stick me with Ken Ham's definition of what faith is, nor
So
pretend.
this is what I'm disagreeing with. That the young Earth creationist organizations, the leading ones like ICR and AIG, what they're posting in their statement of
Okay,
faith.
I'm not responsible for what they say. Neither is the Orthodox Church. Neither is the Roman Catholic Church. Neither is the
So
Southern
you
Baptist
understand
Convention.
what I am
Neither
objecting to. I'm objecting
Sure.
to the definition of faith that you find in all the dictionaries, that you find in Martin Luther's
So
citations.
you agree that theism can be reasonable?
No.
Because we can, but we're following the same rules of reason that you're following. You just disagree with us about the conclusion.
You've asserted a conviction, okay? You're convinced of something for which there was no evidence to indicate that.
In your opinion, and in my opinion, there was evidence to choose that. Look, I was in grad school, I tutored under atheists, I listened to atheism, thought about atheism really hard, had theistic professors, atheistic professors, tested my beliefs, got to one point in my life where I didn't even want to be a Christian. I thought about not being a Christian, examined it, tried to put the world together, tried to follow the rules that I'm accepting that you described as a reasonable life, and I came to a different conclusion than you. So as Professor Shermer said to me last night, we need to lose this adversarial language where all theists are irrationalists, believing in magic.
I'm all
and
about building the bridges. Okay, I am. But you got to remember where I'm coming from, right? This is the chairman of the board of education in this state who says is a dentist with no scientific degrees at all. Who
Okay.
says someone has to stand up to experts.
So
Would you say that that's irrational?
Here's really good news for you, which I keep saying to my atheist friends. If you want me to come and testify in front of the Board of Education and argue exactly what I argued to you, which is we should follow best reason and best evidence, and we should make conclusions as we come up with them, and that's the way we should do a reasonable life, I'm happy to do that. And in fact, in some